How's it going, everybody? In this video, I want to go over everything you should know before you decide to buy Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Going over some major details here that might be important, at least once you guys have an informed decision if you decided to get this right away or later down the line when it's discounted, or maybe some of the details I share with you may not interest you about this game. But as it stands, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is set to launch February 4th, which is not far from now, honestly, within like a week or two. And this game is promising an authentic, grounded open world action RPG experience, unlike most of what we see from the genre. If you are familiar with the first game, well, you know this is grounded in realism to some extent, as far as, taking place during the late medieval time period. No magic, no dragons. It's not the typical like fantasy medieval type of game. No, it's actually grounded in realism. So you actually have to learn how to fight with a sword and different weapons and the strategy of how medieval fighting actually was back then. On top of learning other things about how the world works, how you can talk to people, etc. And this sequel has had no shortage of eyes on it leading up to its release, mine included, because it's a franchise that does deserve more eyes on it, more attention to it. It's kind of like an old school type of way of doing an RPG where it doesn't hold your hand really. It's open ended to some degree as well too, as far as you can tackle things kind of almost in a way you want to. You got different options. You can play Henry however you want to play him for the most part. Like there's different ways you can go about this. So I want to go over some few key details about the game that you should know. From its open world setting to the sort of gameplay experience, it looks to set to deliver and more. With the setting, one of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's biggest selling points is its open world and how it's completely grounded in realism. This is set in the early 15th century. The game will once again take players to what the developer says is an authentic and grounded recreation of central Bohemia. You can also expect a much larger world this time around, but I'll get into that in a bit. When it comes to the story, well, as the name implies, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a direct follow-up on its predecessor, which many were surprised by when Warhorse Studios first made the announcement. That, of course, means former blacksmith Henry will once again feature as the protagonist, and once again, you can expect him to become embroiled in a number of large-scale conflicts on top of his own personal tale of revenge. According to the developer, the game will feature over 5 hours of cutscenes, but there's going to be plenty of story to get through. And for those wondering, it is not required to play the first game to understand what's going on in the sequel. There will be, I believe, some like early game like flashbacks to showcase what happened, to summarize up the first game story a bit here within the first few hours of the prologue. So do not worry about that. You do not need to play the first game to enjoy the second one. This time around, there are 2 maps, so sequels usually love to go bigger and better, right? Well, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is doing that by having not 1, but 2 full-fledged open-world maps. 2 maps will see players exploring the region known as the Bohemian Paradise and the city of Kuttenberg, though they will be entirely separate from each other. Overall, Warhorse Studios says the game is supposed to be about twice as large as its predecessor. The aforementioned city of Kuttenberg is going to be a major location in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, one of the world's biggest hubs of trade and civilization at the time. The large silver mining city will be a new kind of environment for the IP. Speaking to IGN about the city, the art director, Victor, says, "We are trying to depict a realistic, immersive, and believable medieval world that is being reconstructed to the best of our knowledge. Naturally, to achieve that, we are not only having our in-house historian, but we are very closely working together with universities, historians, museums, reenactors, and a group of experts from different ethnicities or religious beliefs that we are actively incorporating into development as external advisors." But you might be thinking, well, what about the length of this game? Warhorse Studios has made an effort to impress upon everyone just how massive of an experience Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is going to be. And that certainly seems to be reflected in its runtime. According to the developer, the game is going to be about 80 to 100 hours long. Presumably, those looking to dive fully into its optional offerings will be able to get even more out of it. Then there is a reputation system. Choice and consequence mechanics are clearly going to be a big focus in Deliverance 2, and a reputation system will have a big role to play in that. Specifically, depending on your playstyle, Henry can develop different kinds of reputations for himself, which changes the way NPCs react to him. So for instance, you like to do a lot of thieving, NPCs will behave accordingly. Interesting enough, Warhorse Studios says that will also impact what kinds of decisions Henry will be making in turn, both on micro and macro levels. When it comes to the combat details of this sequel, the devs understand that first-person melee combat wasn't to everyone's taste, but Deliverance 2 is seemingly making some key improvements, on top of tighter controls, more responsive action, and mechanics that are easier to master. The developer is also promising more meaningful variety across different weapon types. That means swords and maces, for instance, will have their own fighting styles, advantages, and disadvantages, which should offer some interesting depth. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's greater emphasis on variety where weapons are concerned will also extend to newly introduced ranged options. Specifically, the game features crossbows and some firearms as available weapons, with neither having been an option in the first game. Obviously, melee combat is going to be your primary means of engagement in combat situations, though you're going to have range options now as well, at the very least. Now, when it comes to firearms, do not think these are going to be like super great or anything like that. These are medieval times after all. So the way they work is you essentially got to load your firearm weapon in here. You maybe get one shot off, and you will not have time to reload if you got like multiple enemies trying to attack you and kill you. You will just have to get maybe one good shot off and make it count, and then go into some melee combat, or see if the firearm shot that you do scares the enemies enough to run away, or the leader at least to run away. Survival elements will continue to play an important role in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 as well. Players will have to ensure that Henry is eating and sleeping regularly, and how you choose to tackle those problems will have consequences. For example, if Henry is found sleeping somewhere he shouldn't be, he will be woken up rather than being allowed to finish his rest. Meanwhile, depending on where you go to sleep, Henry can also be attacked and ambushed while he's sleeping. Alchemy is making a comeback. Henry is a blacksmith by trade, but alchemy will also be an important part of the gameplay loop in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Specifically, going into the world and looking for resources to gather will be something players will be doing plenty of, with those resources then being used to craft a variety of potions. And yes, the saving potion is returning as well. Let's get into graphics modes here. As confirmed by Warhorse Studios, Deliverance 2 will feature performance and fidelity modes on both PS5 and Xbox Series X, with the former running at an upscaled 1440p at 60 FPS, and the latter at an upscaled 4K and 30 FPS. On Xbox Series S, meanwhile, the game will run at 1080p 30 FPS, with no 60 FPS option offered. There are also PS5 Pro enhancements. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is also confirmed to feature PS5 Pro support in addition to the aforementioned performance and fidelity modes on Sony's more powerful console. The game will also feature a Pro mode, which will run the game at an upscaled 4K and 60 FPS. But let's get into the PC requirements. For those hoping to play the game on PC, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's requirements can be fairly steep. On lowest settings, to run the game at 1080p and 30 FPS, you'll need either an i5 8400 or a Ryzen 5 2600, alongside either a GeForce GTX 1060 or Radeon RX 580, and 16 gigs of RAM. Meanwhile, for a recommended setup that plays the game at 1440p and 60 FPS, you'll require either an i5 13600K or a Ryzen 5 7600X, as well as either a GeForce RTX 3060 Ti or a Radeon RX 6700 XT and 24 gigs of RAM. Regardless of which setup you're playing on, you'll also need an SSD and around 100 gigabytes of free storage. That is insane and wild to me. So hopefully there's a nice middle ground you can find there. Personally, me, I don't care about 4K. I'm cool playing my games at 1080p 60 FPS or even 120 FPS if I like to go to extra mile there. But yeah, just keep in mind, make sure your PC can run this. Lastly, I want to touch on possible expansions for the game. Well, it's clear that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 isn't going to be lacking in content upon its release, but Warhorse Studios has plans to add plenty more in post-launch period as well. The developer has confirmed that it will release 3 expansions for the action RPG, though at this stage there's not much else that's known about them. So we'll learn more about them at some point later on. I imagine maybe PAX East or Summer Games Fest, we might get a teaser for the first expansion possibly coming in the future. But I think right now, yeah, getting the game out, launched, released into the wild, public to play, make sure it's a polished, good game is the first thing to focus on. And aside from that, there is the different editions. You got the standard on PC for $59.99, so $60 there. And you also got the gold edition for $80. But if you're looking to save a little bit of money, at least the PC players out there, check out CD Keys. I'm partnering with them, and you can get the standard edition for a little bit cheaper, $44.59. And if you want the gold edition, it is priced at $50.29 right now on CD Keys. So check out the link in the description below if you want to go that route, save some money, and it supports me as well at the same time. And that's it. That's all I got for you on everything you should know about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 before you should buy it if you decide to get it. So what do you think about this? After learning these details, does this encourage you to get the game right away? Are you going to wait for a sale? or you're just going to pass on this and play some other games? Sound off in the comments below. And if you find this video helpful and enjoyable, well, hit that like, subscribe if you're new. My name is Mike, and I'll see you in the next video.